Color theory is not something that's going to limit us as artists, but actually it will help us to free us to express and create any mood that we want to have in a painting. I've developed a color wheel that is a good aid for the artist in working with the color foundation. This color wheel takes your primary colors, secondary colors, and intermediate colors and actually specifically locates the color for the artist. These are colors that you can buy in an art supply store. And so instead of just saying red and green are complementary colors, now we specifically know that alizarin crimson and viridian green are true complementary colors. There are 5 color schemes that form a foundation for us as painters to work from. I want to cover these and first talk about a monochromatic color scheme. The monochromatic is simply a one-color color scheme. For instance, if we're taking phthalocyanine blue, we'll be using this for the mood of the painting. We can also use its complement, and you find the complement by going directly through neutral, and this is the orange, which is cadmium scarlet. We can add some of that to dull the color. This is called intensity, the brightness and dullness of the color. So we can use that orange to give us intensity change. We can also add white or tint going up to a lighter blue and add shade to blacken or darken the blue to go down. The second color scheme is a complementary color scheme. And the complement, as I mentioned, goes straight through neutral to the opposite color. In this, again, you have the range between light and dark. You also have the range from bright to dull, or what I call the semi-neutrals, in between the pure hue that's located on the outside of the color wheel and the pure neutral, which is the dull gray, lifeless color. Any color in here is your semi-neutral. From the complement, we can go to an analogous color scheme, and these are 3 closely related colors. So for instance, we've got the yellow-orange, which is cadmium orange, cadmium scarlet, which is orange, and the cadmium red deep. We can also use their complementary colors to neutralize down to the neutral. And so this whole wedge from here can be used for an analogous color scheme. Moving on to the split complementary color scheme, we are working again with the analogous 3 closely related colors. We split these outside 2, find the middle color, and use its complement. In this case, it's phthalo blue. What happens here is we have the dominant warm in the painting, but we also can have a subordinate color, which is the blue, to add balance to the eye. We also then have what is called a triadic color scheme, 3 equidistant colors on the color wheel. For instance here, the cadmium scarlet, viridian green, and the mauve, which is the violet, are the 3 colors. Any 3 equidistant colors on this color wheel can be used for a triadic color relationship. I'd like to show you how I set up a palette. I set this palette up similar to the way the color wheel is set up, and in doing so I can virtually mix any color. I can get beautiful semi-neutral colors, and I can get harmonious color relationships. As you can see, the yellow is, as our primary yellow is here, the cadmium lemon. The orange, or yellow orange, is a cadmium orange, and so on as we move down through the palette to the cadmium scarlet for orange, the cadmium red deep for the red orange, alizarin crimson for our red, the permanent violet for red violet, violet is mauve, and blue violet is ultramarine violet. Going over to the primary blue, I've got a phthalocyanine blue. Up to the blue green is a manganese blue. The true green is viridian, and the yellow green is permanent green light. Using this color wheel, you can virtually mix any color, and I'd like to demonstrate that. First of all, I'm going to take Hooker's Green Light, just a straight tube, and I'm going to squeeze that right on and fade some of that down so you can see the color. Now I'm going to take 2 colors, starting with a cadmium orange, and a viridian green to mix that color. As you can notice, this line goes right across through here. And so I can take these two colors using more of the viridian green, some cadmium orange, and I should be able to mix that cadmium green light. Here is the color. As you can see, it's coming very, very close to that cadmium Hooker's green light. Now I can also take the same color, the Hooker's green light, and I can mix it with its complement, going from a permanent green light to the permanent violet. As you can see, all three of these colors are basically the same. The difference is that one is a tube color, the second one is working with the intermediate cad orange and viridian green, and the other is working with a complementary mix. Using this palette, you can mix virtually every color. We just saw with the Hooker's green light that you can match this on the color wheel. Now I want to show you why it's important to use these pure hue colors for your mixing, because it gives you more variation. I'm going to start with a tube of raw sienna, and I'm going to just again squeeze that on and mix this color with a little water. Now raw sienna is located right here on the color wheel. It's an earth color, or what is called a semi-neutral color. At the same time, I can take the cadmium orange and use its complement, ultramarine violet, which is a blue violet, and I can neutralize this to get a raw sienna. But I can also get a variation of intensity and value change by the concentration of the pigment. I'm going to start by mixing that raw sienna with the yellow-orange and the blue-violet mix. As you can see, I can hit that same color. The difference is I can also add more of that yellow-orange to get a warmer, more pure hue, and I can also then come in with more of that ultramarine violet to get much of a more neutral range, and so I get a richer variation of color. The other exciting thing about working this way, instead of having one pigment that I'm working with, I've got the mingling of two pigments, and that adds a little more variation and visual quality to the paint. Now that we've seen how the palette works and how you can create virtually any color that you mix, let's go ahead and see how we can mix some beautiful semi-neutrals. It's important to know how to mix these semi-neutrals because 95% of almost every painting we're going to do is going to be in the semi-neutral ranges. And this is how we're going to achieve exciting color without getting mud. Let's take a look at the color wheel in this chart. I'm going to use red-violet right here, and I'm going to show some different ways that we create semi-neutrals. First of all, you can neutralize color just taking your red-violet and adding white or adding water. This will create a pastel tone and it neutralizes the color. Another way to neutralize and create beautiful semi-neutrals is by using the complement. In this case, it's the yellow-green or the permanent green light. You have to go through neutral, as I mentioned before, but any color in this range is going to give you a beautiful semi-neutral, and it will set off the pure hue that it's adjacent to. Another thing that we can do with the red-violet is go to the triadic mix, which is blue-green. And as you can see here, we're working through the semi-neutral as we do here, from red-violet to blue-green, to create a nice, soft, neutralized color. We then can take the red-violet and move up to the yellow-orange and work with the semi-neutral range right in through here. So as you can see, here's the red-violet moving to the yellow-orange for a nice, exciting semi-neutral. Finally, the way many people work is using the red-violet and adding black. Black deadens color and it absorbs light, and consequently it's not a good choice for a semi-neutral. Now that we've seen some ways to create some beautiful semi-neutral colors, and how to mix those colors, I want to show you how we can put that paint down in different ways for exciting visual qualities for the semi-neutrals. First of all, I'm going to be working with just yellow-orange and blue-violet, two complementary colors. Many people, when they're working with two colors, such as the yellow, orange, blue, violet, will simply mix that color on the palette and paint it. Just like this. That's a very neutralized color. But there's another way to do this. It's something I call just charging the color by first of all laying in the transparent color tone with the cadmium orange. And while it's still wet, I can charge the color either with the yellow-orange or with the blue-violet to get nice mingling of pigments, and will give me a nice break, and it won't be quite as dull as this look. The last way, while still working transparently here, is to work in the old English style of glazing color. I've laid down already some yellow-orange here, and this is dry. Now I'll come back and I'll simply glaze some of the blue-violet over the top to create another look. It does the same thing. It neutralizes the color, but it gives a nice sparkle in a little different dimension. I've shown you some visual qualities that can happen using the transparent watercolor. Now let's go to transparent, translucent, and opaque visual qualities using again the complements and sometimes a triad. To start with, I've got a transparent underlay of paint, and now I'm coming in with opaque scumbling with the complementary color. And as you can see, leaving that underlay of color on gives a nice sparkle and will achieve the balance that that eye needs. In the second demonstration, I'm using a yellow-orange underlay, and I'm going to come back in with first a translucent blue-violet, the complement of the yellow-orange. A translucent is kind of a cloudy, thin application, so I can see some of the underlay. It's almost like glazing. However, it is a little cloudier. As you can see there, you can see some of the underpainting. And then I'll come back with a stronger opaque application in more of a flat manner and lay that on to give you the opportunity to have the semi-neutral to the pure pastel hue of the blue-violet. I've put a transparent layer of red down, and I'm going to come back with a solid opaque green. But this is called a cloisonné approach. And what I want to do here, instead of scumbling or scraping through, is actually paint a solid area of color and then isolate the red tone in kind of an outline approach. Van Gogh used this to effect in a lot of his paintings, in his sunflowers and so on, where he'd let that undercolor act as an outline to set off the complement. And as you can see, using that complement, it intensifies that red. This green intensifies the red, and as I change the value, it does some different things to the eye. But that can be a fun thing to work with, and you could do this with still lifes, landscape, many different ways. Finally, I want to show you an alla prima approach, and this is just kind of a juicy opaque way of handling paint. And what I'm doing, I'm going to start with a red-violet here. A lot of oil painters or acrylic painters would use it in this manner. And I'm using a triadic mix of a blue-green, you see, just juicily painting in with the red-violet. So we're using the same theory of the complementary or triadic mixes, but now we've handled that paint in 4 new ways to create a little more excitement for the eye. This is a new painting I call Winter Rhythm. As you look at the trees in the upper right, you'll see and feel that red-orange that's coming through. That was an underlay of transparent color coming in with the opaque cool tones I scraped back to give the texture in that warm underlay. Moving over here to the left, you can feel that red-orange peeking through in a translucent manner from the light colors that have been laid over the top. And coming down into the water, I'm working with transparent, translucent, and opaque applications to create a juicy and exciting application. This is another new painting done in the early fall. It was a beaver pond up above where I live. I'm working with transparent applications in the upper area to try to create the bright, late summer feel that I see in the trees and the willows and so on. As I move into the water passage, I'm trying to create more of a murky beaver pond quality. So as I get into this area, not only do I have the transparent, but I come in with translucents and some opaques. And as I come down into those aspen that are lying in the water, I've come in with a straight opaque to try to create some interesting interaction between the 3 visual qualities. It's also important to understand that each color creates a mood. As artists, we can take advantage of this and give a feeling of expression that's going to best say what we want to say. Let's take a look at the chart and see what emotions each color has. Yellow, from warm to cool yellow, can create a happy, content, a feeling of warmth, or bright quality. Green can give a feeling of peacefulness, fresh, growth, or if semi-neutral, it can be a feeling of envy. Blue can have a cold or serene and quiet quality. And violet can give you a spiritual quality, a cool feeling, and even a relaxed mood. Down to red, from cool to warm, can have a feeling of intense, hot, even sensual, or an anger. Orange has a feeling of heat, radiance, and even an active quality. White can be cold. Of course, it has a feeling of purity, and it can have a sterile quality. And finally, black, from a warm black to a cool black, can create a feeling of mood, moody, depressing, mysterious, or even sadness. Okay, this is a painting I call Twilight Elk. It was done in the late winter, and I was trying to create a feeling of serene, calm, cold mood. I selected the colors, the violets, blue violets, and blues to give me that quality. Of course, the blues will give you that serene and quiet feeling, while the violets can give you kind of a spiritual, cool and relaxed quality. And that's really what I was after in this painting. I put a hint of that warm in there to give contrast to the painting, to give it a little more life, and actually add, again, balance for the eye. This is a painting I call Winter Light Valdez. In late winter, you get that warm feeling, even when there's a lot of snow on the ground. A long raking light, strong shadows. And the feeling I wanted to convey, I used the yellow to yellow-orange to give me the warmth and content quality in that area. To contrast that, though, in the shadows, I wanted to come in with the strong blues and cool quality to give me the serenity and the feeling that it was still winter. As we discussed, when I set up my palette, I used the 3 primary colors, the 3 secondary colors, and 6 intermediate colors. With these colors, I can virtually mix any color. And what I want to point out now is that with each color that I use, every time I dip my brush into the paint, I have these choices, these options for fresh, semi-neutral color. First of all, I'm going to choose cadmium orange, which is the yellow-orange. And over here on this chart, you can see, first of all, I can add white to tint the color. I can move to the analogous yellow, and I can take that same analogous mix to the yellow-green for a nice analogous warm. I can come back through to the orange or down to the red-orange for this relationship. At the same time, now for nice semi-neutrals, I can go back to the complementary color. And as you can see, here I'm starting to neutralize with the blue-violet or ultramarine violet down to the gray, and then coming back to the cooler semi-neutral blue-violet mix. I also have the choice for a triad semi-neutral. Moving over to the blue-green, I can choose to work with these semi-neutrals from the warmer yellow-orange down to the cooler blue-green. And at the same time, I can come back from the yellow-orange to the red-violet and move again a little warmer down to cooler semi-neutrals to give pleasing semi-neutral color. As you can see, there are many choices available every time I put that brush into the paint. I can go to the semi-neutral mixes and the analogous mixes to create harmonious and beautiful semi-neutral color. Taking this a little bit further, you can do this many times when you're on location painting, and you can actually look for a dominant color in the composition. Even if you're in the studio, this can happen if you're setting up a still life. This is a painting that I did in Westcliff of the Sangre de Cristo Range in Colorado. It was done in March, and the dominant color in this composition was blue-violet. It's a transparent watercolor, so I was using the ultramarine violet for my main key or dominant color. All the colors that are in this composition derived from that color. And I moved to the triadic mixes, and I moved to the complementary mixes, and I moved to the analogous mixes on either side. Looking up here at this right corner of the mountains, I'm working with a red-orange, blue-violet mix to create these color tones. And coming up into this raw sienna tone, I'm working with the complementary mix of blue-violet and yellow-orange. In this central mountain, again, I'm back to the triad mix of blue-violet and red-orange. And coming down over here to this blue-green area, I'm working with the triad mix of the permanent green light and the ultramarine violet. Coming down into the bottom area, I'm coming back to the complements to seek a balance for the eye, working with the yellow-orange and the blue-violet. Now that we've looked at a lot of different ways to put color together in an exciting way, I'd like to do a finished demonstration painting. I'm going to stay with that dominant color that we just talked about and key off of it with the triad, analogous, and complementary mixes. Let's take a look at the palette. The key color that I'm going to be using today is the blue-green, or manganese blue, working in watercolor. I'll be working with the analogous mix, moving up to the greens to yellow-green on this side, and I'll be working with the analogous mix, blue-violets and blues down on this side. Straight across on the color wheel, I'm going to be using the complementary mix, cadmium red deep, which is the red-orange. And then the triadic mix of yellow-orange will work for the semi-neutrals right in through here and down to the red-violet for the semi-neutral triadic mix on this side. Later on, I'm going to be using some opaque white to mix with the color to get some exciting translucent and opaque passages in the painting. Now let's get started. Okay, now that I've wet the passages that I want to start with, I'm going to dive in and start painting. So I'm going to try to simplify, emphasize a few areas. First of all, I'm going to take the complement of blue-green, which is red-orange, and just lay a bright strip right across this composition. And before I go too far, this is something that would be really fun to just stay with. I'm going to stop that and come in with a warm tone in this background passage. I want to get that nice and wet and get some warm color. I talked earlier about the warm and cool. You want a little balance for the eye, and this is predominantly going to be cool, a cool passage up here. So I want a hint of that warm just to radiate through. I want to put this blue-green in fairly early on into the painting because it's going to be the dominant key color of the painting, the color that all the rest of the color is going to be derived from. So I want to get that down to get some movement into this composition. As you can see, I'm charging this and letting that color just melt into that warm. So it's neutralizing itself without me having to mix the color in there. I want to keep this very soft and allow that red-orange to just work with the paint. You can see I'm mixing now the manganese blue, and I'm using just a little bit of the viridian green mix in with that. As I move over a little further, I'm going to come in a little stronger with the color. And I want to really pop that in there. Moving in through here. Now here, you can see, I'm coming in pretty strong. I think I'll move that over just a little more and bring that back down and let that paint just start to mingle, letting the warm and cool passages start to balance the eye. And then just using the corner of the brush, I'll come in and try to create a few more textures, a little variation and a little variety. I want to come in with a few color notes here, a couple kind of dead snags. Neutralize it a little bit, pop that in, and allow some of these darks to just work with the rest of the painting. I'm going to let this dry for just a minute, take a look, come back in when it's semi-dry, and do just a little scraping up here in this upper passage. Now I'm going to take my knife and do just a little scraping in through here to create just a little bit of energy between some of these passages. Again, this is not putting any paint on, but it's giving just a little texture that I think might add to the painting. And it's a very subtle thing, but it's something that can be a lot of fun to do, and it can add a little excitement to the paint. Just interesting visual qualities. Just moving right through. The one thing that's important is once you start really having a good time doing this, it's time that you need to stop, because you can get too much happening and it can take away from the overall composition. I'm going to come back to the blue-green. Again, the blue-green is my key color. Here we go. I'm going to utilize some of the white gouache and pick up a little of that and leave some of the sparkle of the dry brush of that paper. Gives me a bit of a translucent. I let this red-orange dry down below, and what that should do, that's the complement. So I'm bringing that blue-green, the manganese blue with a little bit of the gouache, right up against the red-orange. So there's the two complements working together. Let's get a nice flow. And once you put it down, then it's important not to take it too far, because you'll beat it to death and it just looks like it's overworked. But while it's wet, why not come in with some of this translucent white and just play with this a little bit and get some of that soft, beautiful quality that the gouache has to offer against some of this other color. As you can see, it's a very subtle thing, but it works with that blue-green, and it should give a nice soft transition from the darker blue to the lighter blue. I want to go ahead and develop a little stronger break in some of this, just to break up some of this shape. just enough into that translucent gouache to let that bleed in there and let it melt into that passage. It's kind of fun to see how that color can just fuse into the white. It melts in there, and it gives a real exciting look to it. I'm going to go even a little stronger, coming in with a little blue violet. I'm going to stand back and take a look again and see how it's going. Okay, I'm going to start laying in a few of the reflections. And again, I'm going to go back just like I did at the top and lay in a bit of the warm tone before I come to the cool. I'm going to mix here a touch of the violet in here, the cobalt violet, and lay that in just for a little change, the triadic color tone that works with the manganese and the yellow orange. And so that will key off of that and just give me a bit of unexpected color. And I'll just try to keep this paper wet. I pre-wet the paper a little bit before I started, and then I'll be coming back cool again, back into the passage. But I want to get this kind of established before I go too far. I'm going to wet right through this. I'm not concerned at this point about these reflections looking just like that upper area. I'm more concerned about keeping the paper wet and really getting a nice flow in here, and then the relationships of the value, the intensity, and the color. I spend a lot of time with this value foundation, making sure the darks and lights are working in terms of the contrasting and analogous values, because I've realized that if the painting works in terms of value, the painting is going to work. I'm going to start by coming in with a real strong value and get it to set up with the rest of it. And this is going to just make some of that red-orange pop. And it's going to break up the planes and give us something to go from. It's a strong color, but again, what's happening is it's going to mingle with the warm color that's underneath it. So it will neutralize to some extent. And I'm going to just let some of the warm peek through here, and then let some of that manganese just mingle with the rest of the painting. Some of this will later be covered up, but I want to get the pattern going, and I can come back if I want to with a little gouache, a little bit, and cover up some of this area with a snow field that will work into that. But at this point, I just want to get the movement. I'm going to see how that paint works, and if it works well, I might not cover it up. You see, I just want to listen to the paint, see how that flow works, and then come back into it if necessary. At this point, this is a little stronger, and I'm going to pop that in there right up against some of that red-orange and allow that to move into it. I'm going to soften it just a little bit as it comes out and move it down, just trying to get some of these shapes working together. The value is the key, as I mentioned earlier. I've got to get that strong dark and light pattern going. Even though I'm working with color that is going to be harmonious, the strong dark and light pattern has to work. At this point I have to move fairly quickly to catch it before the paint, the paper is a little too dry. So let's just work into it, pool in some of the color, and see what happens. It's exciting just to play with this color and to vary it a little bit. Here I'm neutralizing the manganese with a little of the red violet, and again that gives it a little unexpected change. It's going to give me some fun color to work from, and then I'll vary it and move back to a blue-green again and lay in a little bit of this. I'm just interested in breaking that space up and trying to get some of these shapes to move together. Again, this isn't exactly like the reflection, but it creates a nice visual happening. And as long as that's what's going on, that's the most important thing. Okay, I'm going to stand back and take another look, see where I'm at. Okay, I want to come back and darken just a little bit of the value against this white area. Make it look like there's some bushes, something here. But it's mainly just to establish a bit of a darker passage here. I'm varying it. I'm going from a yellow-green to a blue-green and then to a blue-violet. And I just want to get a little strength happening in here, something to help you focus on that little area. And I'll come back, take a little more of a pure red-orange. Again, that's the complement of that blue-green, and put a note or two right there against the blue-green, just for a color note. By the way, I've taken some white matte strips, and I like to do this when I paint before I get too far along, because what happens, these white matte strips will allow me to see the painting and start to focus in on it. Otherwise, I'm looking at the board and the surrounding area, and it gets a little hard to really determine what I need to do next. So this is helpful, and then if I need to work in a corner, I can always remove that matte strip and then put it back in whenever it's ready, whenever it's necessary. I'm going to come in and pop in against the blue-green again, a couple little red notes. This is pretty wild in terms of color, but I love the color and I like what can happen with it. And whenever you do something like this, it's going to attract the eye and bring your eye up to that passage. And I'll probably repeat it in some other areas in a little bit. Okay, standing back and taking a look, I've decided I want to tone this area, this passage down just a little bit. Since I'm using watercolor, I've got to be very careful to go over this and not paint back into it, because that'll start to lift. And I want that to be just a little darker in value and a little warmer, and bring my eye, or the viewer's eye, into this area. You see, swing it through. And now I'm going to come back and neutralize even further the blue-green red-violet. That will give me more of a neutralized blue-violet into this area here. You see how that tones that down just a little more. I'm going to pick it up into this passage. Okay, I've just mixed some opaque white gouache with a little bit of the cadmium red deep. And I'm going to use a little of that. It will appear almost white, to just break this up and give a little texture, a little dry brush to that passage. Notice how that gives it just a little more sparkle. And it's going to open it up some, and I'm thinking about value here. And that's why I want a little bit of a lighter passage moving in to some of that area. I don't want to kill the red orange that's already there, because I want that strong, intense color to be there. But I'm going to, adjacent to it, pick it up with kind of a lighter value to give it a transition into the blue-green. It's a nice thing about using gouache, it's very compatible with the watercolor. When I work with gouache in with my transparent watercolor, I want to make sure that I planned ahead of time to use it, and that it's not going to be used as a cover-up. If so, the translucent and opaque passages are going to work with the transparent areas, and the painting will have a good chance of success. Before I go too far, I'm going to come back and work on this middle ground snowfield right in here. I'll re-wet that and then come in with the watercolor and the gouache. I want kind of a soft look at this point, so I'm not going to go with too strong a contrasting value. I'm going to work more with the analogous, closely related values. And I'm going to lay that down, and I'll soften that so that it will not have a strong contrast between the water edge and where the snow is. I want that to be fairly subtle. As I mentioned earlier, if you add white to a color, it neutralizes that color, just as in a different way, but just like a complement would. It softens it and gives it a pastel look that is pleasing to the eye. And again, pick up the white with just a touch of the red-orange and come right into it softly, letting that melt into the snowfield, into those shadows, and dragging some of that edge so there's just a little bit of a sparkle right there. These quiet passages, as I have mentioned in the past, are important because they are passive areas. These are areas in the painting that will give your eye a rest, and then it can move to the stronger, more contrasting areas in terms of value and stronger intensity in color. And so we need a good balance between the quiet, passive, and strong, active passages in the painting. I've decided, after looking at this a little bit, that I need a little strength up here. And I'm going to come back and just put another tree. This is kind of a little darker value, but it's not as dark and as some of these other passages. I want it to be a little bit secondary, but at the same time I want it to balance the other side of the composition. It's important for that reason. Pop in a little strength in a few areas, a little bit of a dry brush using this round. I like to use a variety of brushes when I paint. That way the painting won't look like it was done with just one brush, and that's important. I'm constantly standing back and squinting my eye before I go into another passage. Now I've planned in this lower area to come in with another snowfield, and with watercolor I can come back and start to lift this passage before I come in with the gouache. It's not going to lift entirely, but it will make it a little lighter and a little easier to come in with that color. So I'll just start to work over this with the paint. Tone this down a little bit. It breaks up that space in a little more interesting manner. As you can see, coming in with a little more of a highlight of a white, and then I'll come into more of a opaque, translucent and opaque blue-green again for the shadow. As you can see, that takes that out, and it starts to let your eye move into this passage here a little more, and it breaks up that space. I decided to re-wet this little passage right here of water and change that value ever so slightly to bring out a little more of the snowbank. I think a little value change is going to be important. I might vary it just a little bit. Coming in again with the blue-green, what that does is it's going to bring that snowbank out. I don't want to go too far with it, but it's going to break up that space in a little more interesting manner and make it a little more exciting visually. Right here at this base, I'm going to come in with a bit of the triad mix, manganese blue and permanent violet, the red violet. And I just want to catch a bit of this reflection here. I don't want it to be too noticeable, but what this is going to do is help with the balance between the left and right passages. So we'll just add that. Now I'm going to need to stand back and take another look. I'm going to come into these reflection passages and put a little bit of translucent tone in to some of this to create a little bit of a reverse negative thing, and it will be very subtle, but it will hopefully create a little visual quality between the translucent and the transparent that will be kind of exciting. It'll be a secondary passage because the value is fairly close, you see. But at the same time, it's going to move it right towards that snowbank, and it's going to make a few of these reflections a little more distinct. I don't want to go too far with it, but it's kind of fun to play with the translucents and the opaques. I'm using a yellow-orange with a lot of the white gouache, and so that will work. Again, the yellow-orange is the triadic mix, triadic warm tone with the blue-green, and so it will warm up this lower passage just a little bit. I'm going to come into the snowbank again and add just a little more of this manganese blue to the lower area. I felt there was maybe just a little too much contrast. And even though I've got color change here, if you squint your eye real closely, the value is getting much closer. I've added this red-orange so that it will lead your eye and bring it right around in the composition. I want to darken the passage right below the snowbank and then add a few crisp dark lines to break up the reflections and make this passage a little more exciting. Okay, I'm going to come in with just a few crisp lines right here against this part of the snowbank and bring it right in to the reflection to give it a little strength, a little power to the lower edge of that snowbank, and to give a little crispness to the reflection. This point, I think I've carried it as far as I want, and I'm going to stand back, take a look, and hopefully call this finished. And I'd like to review some of the things that we talked about earlier. First of all, the key color and the dominant color in the painting is the blue-green. In this case, it's mainly manganese blue. In some cases, it's a mix between the blue and the green itself. To contrast with that, I've got the complementary color, which is the Cad Red Deep. I've used it in some pure notes right in through here. I used it very palely, tinting it to neutralize it a little bit in the background and into some of the lower area. Then I came back with the blue-green and melted it, charged it into this area so that it neutralized softly to work with the complementary color red-orange. I also then worked with the triad color relationship. Here is a red-violet, blue-green mix. I've also then really tried to focus on value. And if you squint your eye and look closely, you can see some strong contrasting values in a few of these passages, in through here, and down into some of the lower water area. This is where I want the eye to land. So I've concentrated with a little more detail, a little more pure hue, and a contrast that's a little stronger in value. In outlying areas, over here, I'm working with analogous values, closely related. Down and through here, the same way. I want this to be a restful passage to let your eye move in to this area. Also, I've worked with the translucent, transparent, and opaque passages in some of these areas to try to combine some visual qualities along with the color relationships to create excitement in the painting. I hope you will find this information valuable to you in your own painting and that you can explore this exciting world of color.